Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the first Sunday after Christmas Day for the week of December 28th, 2025. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig in this week's podcast. I'm excited. Here we are, the last Sunday of 2025. Where has the year gone? It is amazing how fast a year still continues to go year after year. And I'm also really excited because as I was digging into this week and digging into Matthew, I think there is something here, especially if you listened to last week and we talked about trust and we talked about the angel coming to Joseph and what that all meant. We get part 2 this week. We get that continuation, and it's a major point of what we'll be getting into this week with the science tie-in. And I'm really excited about it because I think, again, this is a part of the Christmas story that's only in Matthew. We don't talk about it a ton, but yet I think it is vital for our understanding of how faith works and making sure that we are understanding what this relationship is intended to look like. I think this week is essential for us to really be digging into and looking at and thinking about for this. So I am really excited to dig into that this week. But before we do that, we got to jump into last week's question, which was, where in Advent do you need to trust? And especially one of the answers that we got this week is talking about when we are bringing people together. We have the holidays. We've had Thanksgiving. Now we're having Christmas. We have New Year's right around the corner. There's a lot of times that we're bringing people together, and there's a lot of reasons for us to disagree. There's a lot of ways and things that we can find to bicker about, things that separate us. And yet in these times, in these seasons, we have to figure out ways to get beyond these different agreements and be able to move forward. I know for myself, there's been definitely times within my own family that there's been different disagreements, and figuring out how to be able to move beyond them is vital for the relationships. And I think it is a key part of this. And especially as we're walking out our faith, and what does that look like? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a person of faith, especially in this time of Advent into Christmas, and as we get into Epiphany? This whole season right here is all about being able to walk out the faith and show that we have a difference in how we carry ourselves. And this is a major part of that, being able to figure out ways to put things aside, being able to let go of things, being able to work together to get through things is vital for us to be able to continue moving forward in the faith as God has desired for us to be in relationship with each other. So let's just jump into it this week. The Old Testament text is out of Isaiah chapter 63, verses 7 through 9. This is one of these moments, yet again, where we are being recalled here from Isaiah to remember the deeds of what God has done for us. The different things of abundance of steadfast love, the ways that God continues to provide for God's people. And even when we are going through distress, remembering that God continues to be with us, that He has redeemed us, He has lifted us up, He has carried us in days of old and continues to do it in the time present and will continue to do that in the future. This recognition of what that all has happened, that this is something that is worthy of getting praise to and acknowledging within Christ's being as we are coming to worship, especially in this Christmas season. The psalm that goes with this is Psalm 148, all 14 verses of it. And this is a moment, and especially with where we're getting into this week, this is an acknowledgement of God's creation, giving praise to God. All of it, from the depths of the sea monsters to the fire and the snow and the hail and the angels and the sun and the moon and the heavens and the mountains, all of it is coming together and praising God. Why? Because we are recognizing what God has done. We are recognizing and acknowledging how God is in and amongst all of it and is creating and allowing for all of this to happen. So thus, this is the only thing that is worthwhile doing, is recognizing and acknowledging the praise that we should be giving God for this blessing in which we get to live day after day. The epistle text or second reading this week is out of Hebrews chapter 2, verses 10 through 18. This then is recognizing and acknowledging that what Christ did for us was this perfect sacrifice. Acknowledging then that we shouldn't be ashamed of this. This is something that we should then give praise and proclaim because of this. And as we do that, it's continuing to put our trust in who God is. And it recognizing that death and the devil had nothing to be able to destroy because of what Christ did for us on our behalf. He took on flesh. He bled for us. And thus it led us out of destruction. And therefore we have great respect, mercy, and we're faithful, but we're also rejoice in that and recognize that the suffering and different things that we have gone through, Christ can recognize and acknowledge in and of Christ's self, because Christ went through the exact same similar thing in the human experience. Christ went through that suffering and thus can guide us out of it as well. The gospel text this week is out of Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 23. So now we have had the birth of the child. We now have had the Magi come and acknowledge the child. Now this, again, remember, based off of where we'll be getting into, this is after the birth. This isn't exactly at the same time. There has been some time that has transpired here. But that the Magi had gone and talked to Herod, and thus we'll get into that. Herod then is wanting to find the child as well. But an angel comes to Joseph then in a dream and states, you need to flee. You need to go to Egypt. And this then is, again, fulfilling some of the different prophecies that have come before. Again, this is one of the big things we have to remember about Matthew. Matthew does a lot of referencing back and acknowledging how this was all talked about in times before. And so thus, that's one of the mainstays of what Matthew does throughout Matthew's gospel. But again, we get in verse 15 talking about how it's acknowledging back. Herod then recognizes that he's been tricked by the Magi as they did not come back, and he had asked to go and give praise and alms to this king as well. He then asked for all children under the age of 2 to be slaughtered. So thus, that gives us some indication here that there has been some time that has transpired. And again, this is then a second time where Matthew then is referencing the prophet Jeremiah in this case of times before, that there was going to be this cry of lamentation coming out from the people of Israel. And again, now after Herod dies, Joseph gets another dream to go back. And it's this acknowledgement then of being able to go back. And it sets the stage for them settling in Nazareth. And again, another prophet talking about that how he was going to be a Nazarene coming out of that. So 3 different times here, Matthew in this gospel is referencing back to prophets of old, acknowledging that this child then is of prophets of old. But again, I also think it's important for us to acknowledge that not once, but twice now in this text and last week as well, that 3 different times angels have come to Joseph, and all 3 times Joseph has acknowledged and listened to what the angel has said. So, before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do our shameless plugs. Working Preacher. If you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between the Sermon Brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm an ordained minister, I go to them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, ways to be thinking about these texts. It's an amazing resource to be able to get and hear and listen to how different seminary professors are thinking about and looking at these texts. And it's an amazing resource, whether you are going to be in front of the pews or if you're just going to be in the pews. How are different people thinking about, who are trained biblical scholars, looking at these texts and thinking about how to potentially talk to people about how to be preaching these texts. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week, but also having art, prayers, hymns, daily devotions to be able to help you get into these texts, and having just amazing additional resources over here. I really have enjoyed spending time here on Vanderbilt's Divinity Library's page for the weekly readings for the Revised Common Lectionary. It is extremely helpful. And again, whether you are sitting in the pews or you are in front of the pews, this is an amazing resource to help get you prepared for the week after week by going through these and spending some time here. So I'd highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter going through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies, going through the weekly readings just like I do, but going through more of an ecological lens consistently, hearing different homilies, hearing some different green tips and different ways to be thinking about these texts. I'd highly recommend checking that out, and it'll be the first link down in the show notes to sign up for getting the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publications. Make sure to check that out. We have probably all heard the analogy, and even you see it on your car. Things in mirror are not as close as they appear. Perception is a major thing on how we look and interpret life in and of itself. How we perceive things, how we see things, is how then we start to believe things. And it's amazing because this is something Jesus talks about multiple times throughout Scripture. Have you come to believe just because you have seen? It gives this inference that there is more to life than just what we see. There's a famous experiment that's kind of been expanded upon lately called the rubber limb experiment. And it's this idea of how you have somebody sit down and you put up a barrier and have them put their actual hand on the far side of the barrier. And on the near side that they can see is a rubber hand. And they will go through and poke the hand and the rubber hand at the same time and stroke it with like a paintbrush or something to start giving that sensation. And suddenly your brain will start to perceive that this rubber hand is your own hand. And thus, one of the things that they can do is they can take a hammer to the rubber hand and almost everybody will flinch in some way. Are they 100% safe? Yes. Did they anticipate and think that they were suddenly going to be pain and kind of laugh about it, that they were surprised that suddenly conceptually they knew, but they would also deceived into this illusion that suddenly this rubber hand was their hand. They were feeling things, they were seeing things, and so thus it was their hand. And so thus, I'm going to feel pain. And the thing is that we've started to realize, and I'll attach a link down below, that we're not the only animal that thinks this way. And thinks is an amazing thing with this. One of them that we've been able to test this on is with octopi. And that octopuses are recognizing that we can put up this fake limb, and again, they will think the same way. And this is really interesting because octopi don't have like a centralized brain like we do. They have like mini brains in their limbs, and it's very flexible and they're able to move around. It's not centralized. So what is this starting to show? To me, it's starting to show that there is this built-in feature within creation that our brains don't always recognize and know what is fully going on. We can only acknowledge, and we're somewhat hardwired to look at how and what we're seeing in front of us, and that is reality, even though we might know subconsciously it isn't fully working that way. Like when we have our hand on the other side of this obstacle, yet we can't see our hand, but we're perceiving this other hand as our hand, so thus that is now our new reality. And another way that we can know that this is somewhat happening is we have talked about people who have had amputation of limbs. They will talk about at times phantom limb pain or phantom limbs in and of themselves, that they are sensing and feeling a limb that is no longer there. Their brain is interpreting, their brain is putting this out there, even though the reality is that it is not there. And this has also been something that we've been able to somewhat utilize when we're trying to work on artificial limbs, that we can tell then that the brain is still sending electrical signals to that part of the body to react, and thus we are interpreting that something is going on there, even though there is no limb there. This leads us into a whole nother discussion in and of itself, in that what we perceive as sight and see is not fully reality in and of itself either. Yes, our brain kind of works like a recorder, like a video camera when you are recording something, but the idea is that it's still rolling frames, that there's certain parts that you focus in on, and then maybe you can increase the frame rate, per se, of that to really hone in on details, but your brain is still filling in lots of the exterior, a lot of things that are around that it is guessing and perceiving that isn't changing. Thus, like if you are focused in on something, when you're at the eye doctor, they're testing your peripheral vision, but your peripheral vision, part of it is also your brain trying to go on autopilot to fill in what it is assuming, because things aren't changing. So we're just going to fill stuff in there so that we can focus in on other parts and put more energy in making sure that we're refreshing what is seeming to be the action. Now, how does this all tie back? This gaps in reality means that we don't always perceive and know everything that is going on. What we are perceiving and understanding as reality may or may not be the full reality. And it may not even be reality when we have an artificial limb in front of us and we're perceiving that as our own limb. Again, I'll attach links down below. People running this experiment. It's fascinating to watch people run this experiment. They are convinced that is their limb. When we look at these texts, then we think about what is going on. This is why I think the beauty of the last 2 weeks and why it is so important for us to recognize what Joseph has gone through and the neuroplasticity of our brains, which is essentially the ability to learn, the ability to adjust, the ability to think in a different way and utilize different parts of our brains. And we can see Joseph doing that. When we go back to chapter 1 last week, and how Joseph is going to dismiss Mary quietly because he thinks that there is something that has gone on. The angel comes to Joseph, and Joseph trusts the angel. Joseph hears, and it goes through some process to recognize what you are perceiving as reality is not reality, and you need to trust me. Joseph must go through a huge range of human emotions at that point, and comes to the conclusion that I am going to believe. This then is illustrated yet again this week, and how now Joseph is going through and is trusting the angel again. You are perceiving that things are going okay, that you are safe, but you need to leave Bethlehem now. You need to go to Egypt, you need to go far away. And then also having the belief and trust when the angel then comes back and says, the harm is now gone, you can now return. And imagine, they probably still heard about the tragedies that were going on near Bethlehem after they left. And then they probably came back and heard that Herod had died, and so they figured then, yeah, that makes sense. But there's also this aspect too of bringing in the human element of this, where Joseph has to convince Mary and this newborn child. Mary probably wants to settle in. She's traveled, and they've been moving all around, and again, they're a young couple. But then to suddenly just be told that we have to up and go, the trust that takes. The trust to realize and understand that the God of the universe is communicating with them through an angel and stating what you are perceiving as safe is not safe. And I feel like this rubber hand experiment helps really kind of bring to light where we are within our faith walk. We're not that much different than what Joseph's going through. Joseph is recognizing and seeing that what I am perceiving is only part of the story. My hand is on the other side as God is trying to help me, keep me safe. And we recognize now, being on this side of the cross, that the rubber hand in a lot of ways is what Jesus will do for us. It's going to take our place, and recognizing that we are going to feel things, we are going to acknowledge things. There's going to be a lot of things that are different, and in a lot of ways we're going to be able to relate to that dummy hand and think it's our hand, until we recognize that when it gets slammed by a hammer, that's not our hand. And the thing that's amazing to me about this whole thing is now that we're recognizing that it's not just the human experience that does the same thing. Us being able to see that octopi do the same thing, that we are able to trick an octopus into believing that this artificial limb is its own limb, shows that I think this is part of the human experience and part of what God has designed initially from the beginning. And this gets us back to the Hebrews text, that if we are fully trusting and acknowledging what Christ did for us, then this is something we should be rejoicing in and acknowledging. That we are acknowledging that Christ has taken on our pain and Christ has gone through that pain for us. This is something worthy of giving praise to. The things that we are perceiving and understanding is not the full reality. We cannot see the full picture. And with us not being able to see the full picture, we have to trust the person who can see the full picture. And it's not a human being in this world right now. It's the creator of the human being who can see the whole picture. We have to be able to acknowledge that. We need to be able to understand that. And without that understanding, we have missed so much. We have missed so much. Without that understanding. Because that understanding opens us up in huge ways, because that's the leap of faith that we are designed to take. It's that understanding that we do not see the full picture. We are seeing what's in front of us, but there is blind spots to us. How we physically see, how we physically understand things. We cannot see and understand it all. We just physically can't. And we have to be okay with that. Doesn't mean that we can't try understanding as much as we can, but just know we're not going to be able to see and understand it all. So that means that we have to have trust. We have to acknowledge that God is knowing the whole thing, that God is sitting on the other side and was touching both of our hands at the same time, to acknowledge that, yes, this is going on and it's going to feel like this is your limb, but it's not. And I do think that it's fascinating to recognize and understand that creation in and of itself seems to have the same way. And so thus it seems to be reacting the same way, as if it is understanding the world the same way. It's almost as if God understands how this creation was created. But that means we have to be able to put down our guard enough to be able to trust. And that's part of the whole aspect of this whole thing of faith, of being able to put aside some of our free will to trust in something greater than ourselves and acknowledge that we cannot see and understand it all. And once we're able to do that, and once we start to see and understand how things are going on beyond what we are able to see and understand fully, that should be leading us, like we see in Isaiah, like we see in Psalms, to praise. We start acknowledging the things that God has continued to do for us, even though we are not deserving. We start to see where God has continued to steer and help us. We start to see how creation in and of itself gives praise to God, because we see the consistencies on how God created throughout creation. And we see that it's designed to trust, based on that there's things that we can't always see. And thus we have blind spots in our sight. Pretty amazing when you start thinking about it. And I think it's an amazing part for us to be at, because we have to acknowledge how important the trust is within this Christmas season and within the faith in and of itself. Because without that, we have missed so much. We missed the boat on so much. So the question I have for you this week is, where do we need to lay into that trust in God further so that we can show our faith better? where do we need to lean into the trust of God further so that we can show our faith in God better? Because it's part of the steps of us being closer to God and acknowledging the miracle of what this whole thing of the birth of Christ as we get into the beginning of what this whole thing is all about. But I think in Matthew's gospel here, we have to acknowledge at the beginning, here we are starting with trust. And Matthew is laying that out saying, look, there was all these prophecies from the prophets and it's all lining up. We have to be able to trust. Because without this trust, none of this is going to make sense. None of this is going to work. So we need to hammer that in right at the beginning. Without that trust, without acknowledging that trust, without working on that trust, we are completely nothing in our faith. And we've completely missed the boat on what this whole faith thing is all about. So as we are in the beginning here, part of the Christmas season, the beginning, still in those first 5 days of Christmas, make sure that we are working on that trust and acknowledging that and working through that, because that is a vital essence of what the true meaning of Christmas is all about. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.